What's up, marketing legends, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm producer Liza from X Growth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about how you can achieve those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So wherever you are, get comfy and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Growth Colony, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of B2B growth strategy and marketing. I'm your host, Shaheen Hoda, and today we're tackling a topic that is on every business leader's mind. How do macro events impact your pipeline? And more importantly, what can you do about it? Today, I have Traci Mabrey, General Manager of Factiva, on the podcast, and we're exactly going to explore that topic. Traci, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Well, I want to start a little bit high level first. And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what are some of the global events, because we've talked about this before, where there are a number of global events which have very big business impacts for a lot of organizations. I'm keen to hear from your side. What are some of the events that are happening right now that are on your radar or is on business leaders' radar that you've been talking to and you've been communicating with that people should pay more attention to?
Well, I think as you mentioned, there is so much going on in the world that it is almost imperative to pay attention to as much as we can. The macro environment, it's being shaped every day in every way by several key external factors, right? Those are going to pose challenges for organizations across the board. For example, geopolitical conflicts are continuing to create uncertainty. They're disrupting global supply chains, increasing regulatory scrutiny, which is certainly something we focus on here. Economic fluctuations are resulting and becoming in combination of. And then we've got inflation, interest rate volatility, that's all part of the economic undercurrent. And then we've got business pressures that they need to adapt all the risk management strategies to those occurrences. So it is a really complex environment out there. And we certainly know that volatility, and we believe that volatility is going to continue.
Interesting. You talked about kind of regulations, you talked about inflation, you talked about geopolitics. There's a lot of events. And when we were chatting, there were a couple of things that you mentioned that I was like, oh, I didn't really think of it that way, where you were talking about what is the impact of the conflict in Gaza? What is happening in Ukraine? What does that mean for some of the businesses? And it was just fascinating to just listen to you. And we didn't have a chance to dive a little bit deeper into like, what are the impacts of these? And I want to get to that. Before doing that, I want to ask you a little bit about one of the things that is on everyone's mind, and I'm keen to hear what is your approach, and that's AI. And my question is specifically, how do you see AI reshaping how businesses are doing what they're doing, and what are some of the recommendations that are coming out of Dow Jones and from yourself as well?
Well, I think number one, I just have to say that AI for me personally, and even for the B2B world, I find it just so incredibly fascinating. It's not very often that you get to learn something, just this completely new dynamic that has burst onto the scene. And I think we're choosing to look at it as a very transformative and opportunistic component. We know that it's reshaping everything just as quickly as we're talking about these macro trends around the world. But AI, it's a game changer. It's going to continue to be a game changer. I think the transformative components that we've seen to date, I think they're going to continue to increase in velocity as everyone becomes even more fluent in AI as both a technology and then how we're going to use it to drive our businesses. And really from this risk and compliance lens, it's letting us really move from a reactive type of component and really looking at events as they're taking place, but into a place of anticipation and very early mitigation, particularly for all these global risks, right? This enables us to then, we're making faster, more accurate decisions based on them. And we're able to process a very significant amount of data now in real time, which is so incredibly critical for everyone that's looking at risk management across their business portfolios. We've got to identify threats that as they're emerging. We've got to take a look at patterns that may be otherwise going unnoticed, right? The predictive capabilities are allowing businesses now to stay ahead of risks. And whether that's related to financial crime, regulatory changes, or those geopolitical shifts that we're starting off talking about, we're responding proactively to them. And, it allows us to go beyond detection. It allows us to layer in the deeper insights, lets us layer in automation for routine tasks. It's just really got both an implementation opportunity for us and an element for us to think about how can we make our businesses even more effective and even better going forward.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you give us a specific example? Because that sounds fascinating, right? Of the predictive capability of AI. Can you think of an example that, a particular example might be for any kind of event that either yourself or an organization has kind of leveraged that predictive capability of AI for risk management?
Yeah, let me give you maybe a couple of examples.
Okay,
right?
that's great.
I think as we're talking about, examples of companies, there's really all of the facets of companies that are now looking at AI are looking at them for very specific business purposes. And when I say very specific business purposes, these are big business purposes, right? There is not much out there that's bigger than risk management, risk mitigation, understanding the world around you in order to make the appropriate business decisions for the future. So one example would be, let's take a multinational oil company, right? A multinational oil company is proactively identifying a high-risk country, right? For any rationale of reason. For this case, within the predictive nature, it's due to potential sanctions changes. And then this multinational oil company proactively, because they're looking at these high-risk countries and potential sanctions, they can decide and have decided to significantly reduce their operations there before, and the big stress word is before, the new regulations come into effect that may impede them going forward and may inject risk into their business, right? They've minimized potential compliance issues and financial losses. I think you can look at that same predictive type of scenario across different industries where we've seen the benefits for due diligence, for example. It leads to adjustments in global supply chain strategies for companies. Due diligence, talking about the divestiture of higher risk businesses because of the due diligence on an ongoing counterparty relationship. Reassessment of market expansion plans is another one, due to potential risks associated with entering or operating within certain regions. So if you're able to look at these proactive measures, you're able to look at patterns, you're able to look at scenarios and think about how that is going to influence you going forward, it's really allowing those businesses to make these critical decisions before it's something that they need to move, exit, or change upon.
I mean, the example that you gave about market entry and doing predictive analysis on the risk of that sounds like such a major task if you're evaluating a company. I mean, where do you even start with the parameters that you gotta look at to evaluate the risk of that? I can't even comprehend what that would look like. Can you give a little bit of insight on like what are the elements that one would look at there?
There are several elements, and as you're looking at a due diligence portfolio, if you will, at looking at market expansion, or you're even looking at M&A, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners here are impacted by or influenced within their organizational strategies. The idea of being able to understand riskful places, people, and potentially geographical parameters along with that, it really offers that embedment of ongoing review and understanding of who you are potentially doing business with in addition to who you are already doing business with. The fact that you're able to look at sanction screening on a global and a comprehensive basis going forward, you know what is leading up to a sanction taking place. You're knowing what is happening in terms of a restriction that is about to become active. And you can then decide before the action is activated what you are going to do to protect your business, to better your business, to pivot your business. We see a very similar paradigm within these examples as we're looking at due diligence around people and counterparties. It's not a one-time activity. And I think when you really talk about AI, one of the really crisp, important benefits is you're talking about, market moving, company moving, potentially geopolitically moving events. But you are looking at them in a new way because we have known historically it's not a one time. It's not a one time of looking at a potential politically exposed person. You need to continue to look over and over and over again. Due diligence is now a core requirement, not only for financial entities and counterparties within financial organizations, but within companies. You need to know who you're doing business with. You need to know who they are doing business with. You need to know where they're doing business. You need to know where they may look to do business in the future. All of these have been repetitive solutions that have had deep automation through AI pre-generative era. But now that we can push it even further, that ongoing knowledge is just something that now gets brought to the forefront and is brought directly back to those that are doing the work in an even more high velocity manner. So it's a really, really impactful technology to leverage, in my opinion, not something that we need to steer away from. We need to lean into it.
I love it. One of the things that is on a lot of people's mind, whether small business, medium business, large business, is the whole concept of, or not the concept, or the lot of the conversation is happening around tariffs right now. Would you consider that as a risk factor? Would a business, would that fall into this category that we're talking about? Because a lot of companies in Australia, there's a big trading between Australia and the US. There's obviously a lot of trade. Well, globally, there is a lot. And there's risk of kind of tariff wars and all that stuff. Would that kind of fall into this basket of kind of risk evaluation?
I think, certainly so. Being able to track detailed information that is voluminous in nature on an ongoing basis is one of these key benefits of generative AI, right? And as we're talking about, any of these macro events that have these very detailed capabilities to shake industries up, particularly as we're looking at these, next amounts of months as we've changed leadership within certain countries, what we've looked at adjusting trade policies, as you've said, shifting more towards tariffs. I think you need to be able to lean into this type of new technology and really get on a predictive curve, because I think it's fair to say we can look at and probably expect significant disruption in global supply chains. We're looking at increased costs for businesses that are reliant on international trade in the numerous places that we're trading around the world. And that is going to come with quite likely a heightened set of regulatory complexities that are going to be now managing these new tariff infrastructures in terms of where the tariffs are going to be applied and implied, whether they are going to be having reactionary factors taken upon them. And it's really going to be an influence, I think, for industries that are dependent on foreign suppliers, especially those with exposure to China and some other very large areas. There's going to be these new barriers, and they're going to be forced to rethink sourcing strategies and accelerating reshoring efforts in many circumstances we're starting to hear. I think these new layers of uncertainty, they're being added to already potential sanctions, export controls, supply chain bottlenecks. So to your point about tariffs, it's now just another level of detailed information that needs ongoing due diligence.
I was going to ask a question. I feel like there's parts of it that we've already answered, but I'm going to ask it if there's anything else that you want to add there. Obviously, risk is a big factor in the financial services space, right? Anti-money laundering, who you're dealing business with, where is that money going, all that stuff. Which I don't want to trivialize it, but it is one of the core areas in the financial services industry. I'm curious to hear from your side, what are some of the unexpected ways that macro events could impact other businesses outside of financial services? And I feel like we've already touched on some. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, because risk management was born out of financial services, like you said, right? It began there because financial organizations, kind of regardless, I'll give a bit of a macro view because it definitely differs per country, but by and large, financial institutions and financial services at the beginning and at the core have always been highly regulated industries. Compliance is part of the DNA. I grew up in financial services. I remember the beginnings of email surveillance and jukeboxing and all sorts of words that now somebody's going to be like, what? But it was a very, it's been, again, part of the DNA and part of just the standard flow of financial services organizations. But risk management is not just a concern for financial services. And it really hasn't been just a concern for financial services for quite some time. We internally here, as we started to grow our risk and compliance organization well over a decade ago, we very quickly said, we know we need to have one lane for financial services and the risk management and the risk mitigation for financial services. And we need to have an absolute parallel swim lane for corporates. Because while corporates haven't been in a highly regulated environment, that we knew that was going to be coming. And we knew that we needed to ensure that any of the industries that we were dealing with, we knew they were going to get impacted by different things that were going to require risk management and risk mitigation and surveillance and due diligence. But we knew they were going to need it. So macro events, it does kind of come at this umbrella level between organizations that are on the corporate side and on the financial side, but now they have far-reaching consequences for every industry. So as now we're looking at risk management, the geopolitical tensions combined with regulatory shifts are the ones that disrupt the supply chain. Supply chains, who's that critical for? Just about every industry out there, right? Those are leading supply chain disruptions, then leads a multinational manufacturing organization to operational delays, potentially increased cost on the manufacturer, on the retailers. Now there's increased cost for tech firms that are managing the solutions. So all these economic fluctuations, ultimately, who are they impacting, and why does this risk management has become an immense requirement for corporations? Because it's impacting consumers. It's impacting the regular folks around the world. It's impacting consumer demand. It's impacting what we're going to be able to buy, how much it's going to cost to buy a particular good or service. It's then also going to start to impact investment decisions, right? How much money do I have to invest versus how much money is it taking to buy whatever I need to buy that day? And that all comes back full circle to the corporate business stability, right? Which then leads back to the financial services who are talking about all of this regulatory scrutiny. So it really is, we just really are, it's now just part of our corporate flow, and we need to ensure that the tide of rising regulatory scrutiny, it's around financial crime, absolutely. But it also is there in terms of data privacy. It's also ensuring that non-financial organizations stay compliant and aren't adding additional reputational risk damage, legal penalties, et cetera, that are on top of the scenarios that they're managing daily. So it's part of the world now.
Initially when we chatted, I was like, I wonder how this relates to B2B marketing, this risk component. And I had a conversation very recently with somebody from one of the largest logistics company. They're basically, freights and transporting goods across the world. And we were having a chat, and she mentioned that we were talking about whether they should be focusing on larger companies to expand their share of wallet or land more of them, or the larger number of kind of smaller businesses. And one of the things that she goes to me and she mentions, like, well, until now, in the past couple of years, we've stopped taking shipments through the Suez Canal because of some of the risk factors that are there, right? So this is, by the way, I'm saying I had no clue about this, and I did not realize the impact of this. And she's like, we've stopped taking shipments through Suez Canal. Don't quote me, but I think it was because of piracy in the region, and we've been going through over Africa to do these. And what has that did was it increased the price for shipping. All the shipping companies increased their supply, and now the Suez Canal is opening and we're looking at going through it, but then there is an oversupply and the prices are going to tank, and now we really need numbers. And I'm like, I was just blown away by how this could impact the complete strategy of an organization this large. my question is, you've mentioned a number of different industries. We talked about financial services. You talked about, obviously supply chain impacting everybody, manufacturing, retailers, oil and gas. What are some of the organizations that you see if you were to rate, and financial services would be probably at the top of the, or maybe government and financial services, maybe they're at the top of the most in need of predictive risk analysis. What are the industries that you would put underneath? What would be, for example, the top 5 industries that you say these guys are heavily impacted? They very regularly look at this kind of data.
I don't know if I could give you a ranking of who would be most impacted versus who would be least impacted, because even in the example that you just gave about the Suez Canal, right? The Suez Canal, the blockage happened in what, 2021, right? And we all, right, across the world, we all saw what happens when that just absolutely geographically, almost autonomously open space was unavailable. The ripples across the supply chain was just unbelievable, even to someone who maybe doesn't have a background in consumer goods or manufacturing or commercial fleet potentially. So it's a really interesting one to kind of use as that bellwether, because I think that's always the example as we talk with corporations about risk management. That's one of the things that you really bring up, because it didn't get tangible until then, until someone was like, well, I can't get, a bottle of X, or I can't get a piece of, the kind of the machine that needs to get made over here. It was everything that you either were consuming or was something that was built by someone who needed to consume it. And when it became really real to be like, yeah, we are all interconnected, right? And I think that's why, from an industry perspective, it's probably difficult to say an industry that isn't affected. Because without question, governments and financials, they get a bit of both sides of that coin, right? They're analyzing the regulations, they're making the regulations, they're figuring out how to conduct business within these regulatory environments. So it's kind of a buy side, sell side, is an old financial services person's term, right? But when you get into the corporate and into the wider space, manufacturing is a very highly complex, very diverse marketplace. And maybe that's a good point to make to the listeners. It's really, think about corporations as almost marketplaces. There is always a buy side and a sell side. There is always a maker and a retailer. There is always a buyer and a seller. And if you really look at whether you're talking about consumer goods, you're talking about pharmas, you're talking about manufacturing, you're talking about energy, everyone is interdependently active in a risk management environment. And you're always having to really look at all sides of your business. And it does kind of come back full circle to the advent of generative AI, enhanced automation, because you're needing to look around all these corners all the time. And it really is something that's only going to continue, I personally think, despite some of the geopolitical shifts that are going on right now, because we are an interdependent global marketplace from a corporate landscape. And that is something that is not going to change. It is going to continue to be enhanced by regulatory scrutiny. That's my gut.
I think we've very solidly established that a large number of organizations need to think about the risk management component, especially if they're operating on a global scale. There's the interconnectivity with other markets. How do I approach this? What would be the steps that I need to approach as an organization to kind of set this up inside of our organization to make sure that we have a solid risk management process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And they need to be practical steps, right? As we're talking about it from an organizational perspective. And practical steps are about how to protect operations, in addition to talk about how to stay ahead of these emerging risks, right? I really look at it as both, right? You've got your BAU. How do I keep my business going? How do I keep my margin profile? How do I keep my EBITDA profile? But how do I now stay ahead of these emerging risks that is now an additive component that I need to do every single day? So let's talk about some practical steps then, right? So we've got our increasingly uncertain environment, lots of things going on. So First off, we want companies to focus on building resilience, right? Strengthen the risk management frameworks that are already within an organization. Risk management frameworks start with the dreaded D word, data. You need to understand your data. You need to know where your data is, you need to know what your data is, and you need to ensure that your data is clean. Now, again, with the tech hat on, it's a great thing to say, I need clean data. But it is something that is absolutely imperative, because understanding the organizational inner workings of your data and the data that you're using for all of the people that you do business with, you've got to have yourself in line. You got to have yourself sorted in terms of data. So getting your data, being able to access the data, and being able to leverage the data in all of these new systems that do all of these amazing things would be practical step one, right? Then you need to be putting that data into technology, right? Data and technology go hand in hand in all of our worlds now, right? So the technology is in place now where you can enhance the real-time monitoring and begin these predictive analytics cycles, right? You need to really be ensuring that you can monitor this data continually and look at how you're building into predictive analytics models. So what we think is, as those practical steps of the dreaded D word, making sure you've got the data and the data is clean, making sure you bring it into the technology so you can monitor and work on your predictive models, this starts to allow organizations to detect these emerging threats, right? You're able to also be able to detect, which is a great thing, positive outcomes, right? A lot of people think in companies, risk management is kind of this, oh, the sky is falling, I'm going to have this awful moment. You can actually detect very good things as well, right? The fact that you are looking through information is truly a benefit to you, whether you're protecting yourself from something that could go awry or you're uncovering an opportunity that you maybe wouldn't even know was there. It really does offer the certainly early threat detection and early warning system, but does offer you an opportunistic benefit. And really, those regular risk assessments, getting into a continual and ongoing regularity in terms of the analysis, allows you then to go into things like scenario planning. Scenario planning can be certainly for a detrimental concern. Scenario planning can also be for a good activity. And then it's going to help you and help the businesses, help businesses anticipate the disruptions, whether those are from the regulatory changes, the geopolitical instability, both that we've mentioned at length. But think about it also, cyber threats, right? Yet another reason out there in the risk world to understand what your data is, how you're using it, what technologies you're using it with. And it's really also important when you're talking about practical steps with companies. I've said data, I've said technology a couple of times with good favor, because data and technology is at the crux. But what is also a necessity to be there, and I will continue to argue, even as a tech person and having my tech hat on, people are still the key. Within an organization, you have to foster a strong risk-aware culture. It just has to, again, just like it's part of our data DNA, it needs to be part of our people DNA. We should ensure not only that compliance teams are well equipped with the latest regulatory insights, but that employees really understand their role in mitigating the risks. It goes back to me like we were talking, giving the example of Suez Canal. You got to make it real for people. This does impact every person in an organization. It can potentially impact you as a consumer in your life. So really understanding your role at a company in mitigating risk, whatever role you have, is an amazing thing to do. And then you have another opportunity on even a personal note to collaborate with industry peers and regulators and providers, glean additional perspectives. It really is a unifying element, because we are all looking at how we manage and mitigate risk. It is a unifying element to help our businesses and the businesses of our neighbors and peers and friends stay agile and prepared for whatever comes next.
I love that. I love the three components of data, tech, and people. That's key. One last question that I have before we jump into some rapid fire question.
Okay.
Especially with your kind of Factiva hat on, what are some of the macro events that are on your radar that could potentially shake up industries in the next 12 months? What are some of the things that you and the team are having a lot of conversations? I'm keen to know what is on your radar.
Oh, so much. Yeah. With the Factiva hat on, when you're talking about the news business, there's just a little happening in the world. I think we've got a lot of different factors going on. I think without question, looking at populism versus globalism right now, that is a very deeply intricate scenario of information and responses. So that is certainly one very key component for us. We're also looking at, being in the B2B world, we also are looking at this, generational evolution that's taking place across the world in terms of the workplace. And I think, generative AI coming in at this point, it is a very interesting juxtaposition of generational transfers of workforce and of consumers out in the world. So there is just a very important need to really understand a little bit back to data, technology, and people, how we continue to bridge the people to data to technology spectrum, because we are all going to need to reap the benefits of what is going to be continuing to come down the pike technology wise. But it's to ensure too that we have that human element. That's another piece that's really important to us within Factiva. It's not just a bit of an example that I would give you. It's something that we really believe. Internally here, we call it, we kind of coined it authentic intelligence, because we've got this incredibly robust infrastructure of data and of technology, of taxonomy and metadata and all these great elements. And it's really what we've built our businesses on. But we also have just such a deep domain in terms of subject matter experts that are working with that data and that understand our customers and everyone. That infusion between the human and the data and the tech is so critically important. And we firmly believe too that news is it's a people business. Journalists are around the world uncovering stories and covering places and people at many times great personal risk. And as we're looking at what we're doing here and talking about risk, that is something, again, it's a very personal component that we all need to ensure that we are giving the continued support and advocacy for.
Indeed. Okay, let's do some rapid fire questions. So the first question I have is, what is one resource? This could be a book, a blog, a podcast, whatever it is, that has had a profound impact on you in the past 3 to 6 months that you've come across?
Oh, in the past 3 to 6 months. Well, I'm going to give you a book that I read actually every year during the holidays. So it is a movie.
Okay.
Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet is my hands down annual read, and he writes the words that I think one needs in times of solace and sadness, but also as this incredible mechanism to rebuild hope and direction. I read it every year at the turn of the new year, because I think it's an amazing just kind of bellwether and barometer for me in personal life and in work life. So I absolutely have to say that. And I would say too that my ongoing, I am a TED Talk fan as well, so you can always find me looking up some great TED Talk, and I happen to not surprisingly in the news business read a few newspapers, digital and print. Find you.
I love it. Okay, if you could give one advice to B2B leaders, what would it be?
Never forget that the end client out there is a person. That I got to say, I started out, like I've said, in financial services, and I remember being in financial services, and I started in the wealth management arena. So I really always have at my core, there is a person out there that is working and looking at how they spend and invest their money. And that was something that was just, it was brought into my ethos straight away from the moment I kind of hit the bricks, if you will, at financial services. And I think that still very much holds true today. Everything that we're doing is ultimately impacting someone's life, whether you're getting them a banana or a newspaper or a smartphone. It's an amazing thing to be able to ensure that we are a diverse ecosystem in a diverse marketplace. So I would give that one piece of advice, whether you're a marketer or you're a salesperson. I would say at the end of the day, there's regular people that are out there.
There's a person on the other side.
Do the right thing. Yeah.
Traci, who are some of the thought leaders and influencers that you follow and listen to regularly?
Oh gosh. I mean, one of the biggest, I mean, he's not just an influencer. I mean, he's a CEO mecca, but Satya Nadella is just, he's right up there at being my all-time favorite, not just because of an exceptional, career in the organization and just the just global prowess of Microsoft, but he has been in so many different things that I've read about him and gotten to listen to him. He's this visionary and innovative tech leader, but he leads with empathy. And that's something that I find that's my own personal style. As you can probably tell, I've probably been very empathetic as I've been talking about people being at the heart and the end of what we do. But I think it's an incredible tool to continue to be getting guided from, and how empathetic leadership style can be very, very motivating, even in a very, very large, market industry, world leading and world moving organization. So he's definitely there. Christina Brady, that's the CEO and co-founder of Luster. She's another one, not as well known as Satya, but I look for her for insights on personal brand building and growth business strategies. I'm also a big believer in personal brand building and ensuring that we're all getting our voice out there, right? Just because we're in business does not mean that networking and having our voices heard is something that we all should all be doing in addition to our day job, so to speak.
Love it. Last one that I have is, what is something that excites you about B2B today?
Oh gosh, I'm going to be absolutely corny because we haven't said AI about 10,000 times, but I will say that, the opportunity and yes, the challenges that are coming with generative AI really going full mainstream. I mean, it's been it's been a couple of years since it really burst onto the scene in an amazing new way. I really think from a B2B standpoint, it's a very, very exciting thing to be able to learn about, to understand, to implement, and to continue to figure out how this is going to shape B2B for years and decades to come. So I think AI right now, that's at the top of the chart.
That's where to be. I hear you. I hear you. Well, Traci, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been an awesome conversation. It has. I love talking about the bigger picture, the macro perspective. We talked about geopolitics, all that stuff. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you again. I really appreciate you having me and having us. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Liza Maywald and Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Liza and Alexander. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make this show without you. This episode was hosted by Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at Xgrowth. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Growth Colony, check out our newsletter and subscribe with the link in the pod description. Do you think you'd be a great guest or just interested in a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. Or fill out the form in the description. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week right here on Growth Colony.